So, welcome back to Academics 1. I wanted to tonight talk to you about something a little different. We're not going to be meeting on Halloween, so I thought we'd do something a little Halloween themed that still covers, communication, English language arts, culture, and kind of put that together to contextualize how people lived differently than us. So I'll start out with saying that in 1938, there was a 23-year-old man who managed to convince most of America that the Martians had invaded, of all places, New Jersey. You heard that right, New Jersey. His name was Orson Welles. Orson Welles was a towering figure in American broadcasting, television, theater, movies. He made Citizen Kane, which is just in my opinion in the top five best films ever made. Not the most interesting, the best. We're talking film as art. He had this uh, drive about him. He was a true artist. His IQ bordered certainly on genius level, and he put one over on us, very much unintentionally, as you'll come to find out. So Wells was 23 years old, as I said, when he did this. He and his theater company, he had a theater company. I'm looking down, guys, I have notes I wrote out. Uh, Decided to update H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds novel for national radio. Wells, despite being very young at 23, he'd been in radio for several years, and he was known at that point primarily as the voice of the Shadow. And I'll play that for you. I've got to do this carefully, though.
Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
And that was his thing. He did the Shadow for a number of years. Was he did, put out a prolific amount of work, to be quite honest. A lot of work. So you have to put this in the context of the times. In 1938, I mean, there was no television. There certainly weren't computers. You wouldn't be seeing me like you are now if we lived then. So how it would generally work, I mean, everybody in America would get a newspaper. Everybody in America had a radio. Television wouldn't come into the picture for just a little while longer yet. But Orson Welles would monopolize that when it came along. So families would gather nightly and hear about the news of the day from one of the broadcasting companies. NBC and CBS were the two big ones. They would put out the morning paper. There'd be an evening paper, and this would be how people were updated on the news throughout the day. A whole lot slower, uh, very much not instantaneous, but they depended on truth. They were listening to the greats like Walter Winchell deliver the news. They were trusting that John Daly was another broadcaster from that age that people, I mean, trusted. They didn't think that anybody who worked in they trusted, and the bottom line is they trusted journalists back then. Uh, so much more so. than today. So this was the golden age of radio. Again, as I said, families would sit down, uh, catch up on the news on Sundays and Saturdays. There were a lot of radio shows. This is like what the movies are today, except you go to the living room with your mother and father and siblings, and you'd sit down and you'd listen to maybe Edgar Bergen, who was a ventriloquist. Ventriloquist is a guy who would sit. If you want an example of a modern day one, YouTube Jeff Dunham, Dunham. It's a guy or gal that makes dolls talk, and it pretends that they're having a conversation with an inanimate object. It's a lot more entertaining than I just made it sound, because I just made it sound pretty dumb. But that was, I mean, what maybe many Americans were doing on that night, because Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. Charlie McCarthy was the dummy, was the inanimate object. Uh, on NBC, they may be tuned into CBS after that show got done at 8:12. So they would have missed the disclaimer at the beginning of the the broadcast. Announcer: The Columbia's Broadcasting System and its affiliated station presents Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Ladies and gentlemen, the director of the Mercury Theater and star of these broadcasts, Orson Welles. So they set it up very much. I mean, it's a fake thing. It was an hour-long dramatization. But even Wells even goes on, he says at the very end, "This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be." Remember, it was Halloween Eve. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying "boo." Yeah, they talked a little differently back then too. "Starting now, we couldn't soap all your windows and steal all your garden gates by tomorrow night, so we did the best next thing. We annihilated the world before your very ears and utterly destroyed the CBS. You will be relieved, I hope, to learn that we didn't mean it, and that both institutions are still open for business. So goodbye, everybody, and remember the terrible lessons you learned tonight. That grinning, glowing, globular invader of your living room is an inhabitant of the pumpkin patch. And if your doorbell rings and nobody's there, there was no Martian. It's Halloween." So, in modern day parlance, it was all a fake. Everything's fine, in case you missed it. But at that point, people were already running for the hills. And according to interviews he did later, the police were there in the station ready to arrest him and his company. For what? They didn't know. But the police were certainly there. So I wanted to walk through a bit of this broadcast with you. It's an extraordinarily significant piece of Americana, American culture, that everybody ought to be familiar with. And certainly it's still in modern day reference. Tom Cruise, I'm sorry, yeah, it was Tom Cruise, did a movie not long ago based on H.G. Wells's War of the World. This is still played and referenced come Halloween, which is why we're doing it, and I'm doing it with you right now. This is still performed around the country, although people know better now and don't think the Martians, for one, actually existed, or that they've come to get them. So I take you now to Halloween night, 1938. It's 8 p.m. You're in your living room with your family. You turn on CBS and you listen.